Hello and welcome to Real Talk. I'm your host, Eddie Kara. Welcome, John, to our very first episode of Real Talk.
Yeah, thank you for having
It
me.
is a podcast basically where we do talk mainly about politics and what's going on right now. So we just had a Canadian federal election on April 28th. Let's begin by, first of all, the result itself. Did it at all shock you?
I'm not surprised. I think it's pretty representative of the general sentiment I got from just interacting with people. The election, I don't think should come to much surprise of anyone. I do see a lot of interactions on Twitter and stuff like that of the poll differences. The Conservatives managed to lose such a lead, and I think that's kind of uh, permeating the news and stuff like that.
It's also quite a shock, right? Fir- First of all, I'm a bit disappointed by the polls. The last poll showed by Léger that Liberals would be up in the national or popular vote rather by 5 points. And it ended up being there was a margin of error of I think 2.6 or 3.6, if I'm not mistaken. So as of right now, basically, we're noticing that the result is, over 2 percentage points, but not as big as well. So for those unaware or joining us, if you're from a different country, we're noticing the following result right now. It's 168 seats last time I checked. So in terms of
The
the
numbers
seat,
as of now haven't been actually properly affirmed yet. That'll be happening
right?
shortly.
Why
But
is
yeah,
that?
well, they're just doing some recounting in certain competitive ridings. So they're just recounting the vote just so we could get like the final results in the upcoming days. But as of right now, the Liberals are looking to have maybe 168 to 170 about in Parliament. But I think we're going to fall around 169 seats for the Liberals in Parliament.
If we're noticing the result itself, absolutely right. It is 169 seats as we're counting. They are preliminary results. So what that means is usually throughout the next 2 weeks, we ought to find, after a lot of recounting is done, the final results that will be submitted in an official capacity by Elections Canada returning officers. But the recounting has been going on in the last few days, and we're noticing very close writings, and there's about like 40 of them, where the percentage margin of difference between the first and second place candidates in said writing was less than 1%. And that ought to give uh, the campaigns the right to call for a recount, right? Because it has to be below or at 1% margin of difference. Otherwise, it wouldn't be eligible for that recount. So, as of things stand, we do have the result of 169 seats for the Liberals with 144 Conservative, and the Bloc Québécois with 22 seats, and the NDP with a resounding
Seven.
seven, and the Greens with only one seat. So, what was your opinion over well, let's just say the overall campaign itself? It was 36 days long.
It was very short in my lifetime, the shortest campaign that I've experienced. It was quite rapid. We see at the end of the results that there are more people voting compared to last election. I believe it was around 68% voter turnout.
Yeah.
Still not ideal, but voter apathy is a real thing. That's the billion-dollar question. How do we get people more involved in politics? But I'm glad people got out. I think there was around 7 million advanced voters, which is quite impressive. And well, in general, around these elections, I think it was energetic. There wasn't anything really news shattering. Like in the election period itself, there was a lot more news prior to the election being called, with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resigning and Mark Carney winning the leadership race within the Liberal Party. I think that was the biggest news, I would say. But those are my vibes. What are you thinking?
So as of things stand, conservatives are actually, I just looked at the results. There's a change at 143 and the Bloc Québécois is back at 23. So the campaign itself, look, it was a very short campaign, and let's not forget the last 2 weeks of the campaign, which was a surprise to me. Mark Carney chose to suspend campaign activities, which did give the chance for the Conservatives to sort of kick back the momentum they used to have. So let's remember leading up to the campaign, polls were showing when Justin Trudeau was prime minister and the leader of the Canadian Liberal Party. Um, he had quite a resounding lead of double digits, varying between 16 to 20%. And then, obviously, with the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, it prompted Justin Trudeau's announcement of resignation, which perpetuated a leadership race. And basically, I would say the last memorable act of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was literally when Trump threatened to be considering putting tariffs on, which was back in January. And we had a level of unity throughout the country, even in Quebec, which is the province we're in, where even at hockey games, we were booing our American opponents, which is
That's
something
quite
that we
interesting.
normally do not see with Canadians, right?
Prompting Canadians to do this.
Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of
I think it's very odd to see that, but it was interesting to
Yeah.
see a sort of a revival of Canadian nationalism in the face of American aggression. And in those last moments, I think Justin Trudeau played a unifying character. Like him or not, I think he did sort of rally us around the Canadian flag, especially in that hockey game there, the Four Nations hockey game. That was quite intense. Uh, I remember even more of my separatist friends were even cheering on Team Canada. So, that was sort of a cultural maybe vibe shift in what's going on politically speaking. So it's quite interesting.
And how we politely had to wait at the hockey games to, first of all, wait at the right time of the national anthems before we started booing, which was the most hilarious part, in my opinion. But let's try to segue into the leadership race.
Sure.
We saw an increase of a few percentage points for Liberals, but not really that much to make a difference. And then Mark Carney won the leadership race, and then we started seeing quite a difference. So we started seeing much more of an increase in the Liberal polling numbers. So let's start from there. And then there was a campaign that was announced after the leadership race, immediately after it, where the Liberals did want to benefit from what I like to call the honeymoon effect, which is a bright, shiny new thing, pulverizing and energizing the base, right?
Sure, I'll
Um,
start off by just saying that the Liberals aren't in a much stronger position than they were prior to this election. The Liberals are still in a minority government, but it's close to having a majority. But it's nonetheless the same predicament as having a minority government. If I'm not sure what circumstance this would permit, but the Bloc and the Conservative Party can challenge the Liberals on certain policies. So a question Canadians should keep in mind is, can we see the Liberals hold on to power until 2029, which is the next scheduled election? Which that's up in the air for now, and I think it's certainly too early to say, being what, 2 weeks out. So it'll be interesting for sure. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
the biggest shock that I had was how the Conservatives managed prior to this general election to lose the lead they had so quickly. And let's not forget when Mark Carney won the leadership and became the interim prime minister or the prime minister designate, and then he was sworn in. One of the first things he did, if not the first thing, is eliminate the consumer carbon tax. So this is when we started seeing a fade in terms of the messaging strategy of the Conservative Party, right? So I do think that's when things started to, uh, make the Conservatives quite in a crisis mode. And then obviously we launch into an election. He's used to being against Justin Trudeau, who's not there, and the consumer carbon tax. So he tried, Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, tried to switch the messaging to industrial carbon tax, which didn't really stick.
No. I'd actually
Um,
like to comment a bit about this because
mm,
watching the campaign, the Conservatives had an early start in campaigning almost two
on
years
top
in
of that,
advance before the
yeah.
election was called. And I want to give them a compliment, actually. For a long time, their messaging was watertight. They managed to reel all the Conservatives to rally behind the Axe the Tax slogan. And for a while, it looked like that was working with the average Canadian, right? We all sort of rallied behind it because it's such a detestable sort of tax that I think a large percentage of Canadians would agree with that. And for Carney to just drop that on the hat, it sort of destroyed their messaging almost immediately. So all that momentum, we really saw towards the last bit of the campaigning phase, and all their messaging started to fall apart. I could name you a million different slogans that Pierre was hurling out towards the end of it, but I guess that's what politics and the party, I think where they lacked in messaging was really trying to react to the news that was coming. They really built a strong foundation, but couldn't, react well enough.
So let's talk about the messaging strategies of each campaign while we're at it. Because throughout the campaign, there weren't major scandals that were really thrown. The Conservatives tried to go after Mark Carney's character and experience by focusing on the fact that he was a special advisor to Justin Trudeau, by focusing on some of the American investments he had made, and things like that. And before that, the Conservatives, I would say quite successfully, did go on the offensive against the New Democratic Party leader, Jagmeet Singh. And it was his fourth term, I think, yeah, fourth election. He was going to partake in, and he did, as a leader of the NDP. And personally going after him with personal attacks, focusing on the fact that he's sellout Singh with his Rolex watch and the fact that he's only in politics to get his pension before he, you know, resigns or calls an election.
Quite
It
rich
did
coming
work,
from
in my
Pierre.
opinion. But what do you think about that strategy's after effects, if you will, with the general campaign that occurred? And we constantly noticed Jagmeet Singh trying to take some of the airtime during his rallies, speeches, and having almost no effect to move the needle even. So, what do you think about the fact that the sellout Singh ad campaign from the Conservatives being the direct reason the NDP were almost extinct
Sure. I
almost
mean,
a week ago?
we have the fortune of hindsight in this situation, and in the debates amongst all the candidates, it was really a puff out my chest moment for Singh, I would say, because he really had to rally behind the party and, sort of cement his place as the NDP's leader. It was quite astonishing to see them collapse. I think this is the one of their weakest performances nationally. We see they're at 7 seats, at risk of almost being an unofficial party, just above the threshold, I believe, if it was
Since
two seats
1991,
under.
by the way.
It was quite insane. I think moving forward, they're going to have to sort of rethink their strategy because they weren't quite effective. I think the NDP, a lot of them came in second and third in some notable ridings for sure, but it was very dispersed. They had strong candidates, but they didn't really come. And I think what I want to really highlight, I'll go back to the conservative messaging before, but
Mhm.
I wanted to highlight that the NDP, they really need to sort of kind of go back to the grassroots a little bit and sort of not necessarily invoke Jack Layton's name, but sort of go back to what they were known for, of not necessarily always being hand in hand with the Liberal Party, but I think if they want to uh, stand out and build again, they have to say that, hey, this is like our more socialist roots and really show that and not necessarily be hand in hand, but offer a solid alternative. I think that's what will convince their voters, but it's going to take maybe years for this to happen. Um, and
You
going,
mentioned Jack
oh yeah,
Layton, if
for
I
sure.
may. Um, so I actually think, in terms of the strategy, the NDP did not have a messaging strategy, or not really a strategic direction either for this campaign. The logical thing for them to do, like during the election, is try to, you know, go after the left centrist voters who are likely to vote for them. And it's in those cohorts that they had to do their targeting. And they, for the like, for the life of me, I don't understand why, from a strategic standpoint, you would never attack the Liberal Party of Canada, even during post 2021's election. The supply and confidence agreement that they had with the Liberals, which they paid the price for, I think, and that's the one of the primary reasons you noticed the almost extinction of that the NDP. You know, could we also say that the leader wasn't liked at all throughout the country? Do you think likability has a factor in terms of who the leader is?
I think to some degree, yes, but I think this election sort of highlighted the importance of having strong members of parliament in local ridings because I think that's where the sway really happens. It's not enough to have one strong leader because, you know, the leader isn't perfect and how our democracy is set up that we really need to focus on the local ridings and know the neighborhoods that they're representing at the end of the day. I'll tie this a little bit back to the messaging of the conservatives calling
Sure.
him Maserati Marxist or
But
sellout
before
Singh.
you get to that, can I just
Sure,
mention one more thing about the NDP since we're on the topic?
absolutely.
Um, I think one of the biggest mistakes, and it's quite fatal in politics, and you're noticing that right now, Jagmeet Singh made from a strategic standpoint is, for the life of me, I don't understand why last year, after the October two by-elections, one was Elmswood Tanscona, in which it was rumored to be close, and then it was only a difference of 4%. They ended up winning that, which was supposed to be theirs anyways. But the second place at 44% were the Conservatives. And then the other one was La Salle Verdun, in which, by the way, I ran as the one of the Liberal nomination candidates. And then on July 19th, the Prime Minister allegedly decided not to have that open nomination. Uh, we'll probably talk about more on that issue another time. But
They
um,
placed third
the
last time I
NDP,
checked.
yeah. So the NDP, it was a three-way race, very close. And Craig Sauvé, who was a candidate again this year, last year. Anyway, so they performed very well during the two by-elections. Call it luck, call it the negative momentum being exacerbated of the liberal momentum. All of those factors were working for the NDP at the time. And even in the polls, Jagmeet was in second place over Justin Trudeau's numbers. Right after those two by-elections, I think was the right time for him to side with Pierre Poilievre and the Bloc Québécois and call for an election. And the NDP would not be here because they would also be sort of much more on the offense with, against Justin Trudeau. I think
They
that's,
It was
what
a
do you
hard
think about
bullet
that?
to bite. Like just quickly, and not to skip this conversation, but I
Yeah.
think not to make overarching statements here, but I think
Mm.
the messaging of the conservatives attacking the NDP so aggressively was quite hypocritical of them. They called them out on pensions, but Pierre himself is his first job. No, okay, this is me being facetious here, but he's been
It is
a
true.
he's been a member of parliament for 20 odd something years. That's all
Since
he's ever known.
2004.
And pointing the finger at pensions, what's he's lined up for the pension too, so it's just noise to stir up the drama, and I think that's for clicks on social media. But what I'm assuming is I think a lot of Canadians saw through that. Now tying that back into the election race for the NDP, I think the Conservatives in attacking them so aggressively sort of forced them to side with the Liberals because it would have sort of looked bad, and you want to preserve that sort of ego of your leader, right? If because they were calling him by name, it's like, oh, if we're to call this election, Jagmeet needs to sign on them. And if I'm not misremembering, I believe they called them out specifically to for them to go with the Conservatives to get that election called earlier. So it's pretty interesting. But I think for the NDP, they really decided, hey, we can't see eye to eye with the Liberals on 100% of the things, but if we could get, I don't know, maybe 60 to 70% of what we want through, we'd rather bite the bullet on there and then suffer afterwards. But the consequences were clearly shown in this election, so nothing really more to add on that. But yeah.
Yeah, so let's continue off the messaging strategies of the campaigns, if you will. So we were talking about the conservatives really being a little bit flustered at the start of the campaign and trying this, trying that, and it wasn't really working till Stephen Harper, about 2.5 weeks before Election Day, endorsed and campaigned with Pierre Poilievre. And if you all remember in 2006 and then 2008 as well, but when it was his first time running as a leader of the Progressive Conservatives, he used the message of change, and it worked. He ended up with a minority government. And we saw an imitation of that finally resonating among Polyev and his caucus members. And it started taking shape rather than talking about putting Canada first, which was a very Trump-like message, America first. We noticed that it was change, the main message, even though it was a little bit sporadic at times. And but we most notably noticed that in the English debate and the French debate in terms of the conservative messaging strategy. Now, in your view, do you think it resonated with folks across the country?
I would say for conservatives, largely, maybe my friends out west could probably attest to this. They very much anti-liberal government, anti-Trudeau sentiment is very strong out there. I think Canada First would have sort of, I mean, I could envision it right now. I think Canada First for a more conservative voter would have been proper messaging. But Carney responded to that with the Canada Strong like
Yes,
logo, or not logo, but slogan rather.
slogan. Yeah.
Um, I think in the big picture, it's not as quippy as, the axe attacks, build the home, stop the crime messaging. Those are like quippy three-word slogans that everyone, chants on the top of their lungs, right? But it was just interesting for them to have that all scrambled, and I think it kind of pulled the rug under themselves in the last stretch of it.
I mean, it's better to have a bunch of slogans than no slogan at all and not
I,
sticking
I
to it.
agree
I
wholeheartedly.
cannot remember Mark Carney repeating the main message to keep Canada strong
No, I was a
throughout
lot
the
of elbows
campaign.
up
I
towards the
cannot
end.
remember one speech he even repeated that or even ended with that. So in terms of message discipline, in terms of the messaging strategy, I would say it was a complete failure for Mark Carney, a complete win for Pierre Poilievre. What about Jagmeet Singh? What was his messaging strategy, by the way,
I
throughout the campaign?
honestly
Do you
doesn't come
know?
to mind.
Me neither. I mean, he focused on healthcare, but other than that, the last 2, 3 weeks of the campaign, ever since the French debate, my favorite line was his actually from the French debate. The moment he said, "Well, I'm translating in English, and we're going to see clip." So I'll just say it so that we're talking about it.
Yeah, no worries.
Um, when he said, "You're as useless as the monarchy." I personally think that was the line of the debate. Um, But so during the right after that debate, he kept on attacking the Bloc Québécois, and the Bloc Québécois really wanted that airtime to rejuvenate the Bloc Québécois momentum in the province of Quebec. It ended up helping the Bloc. I have no idea why Jagmeet was doing it because he had zero chance of winning more seats in the province of Quebec. So I do think it was very not even diversified his messaging. It was just non-existent, right? Um, but what do you think about the Bloc Québécois messaging and the Green parties?
Well, the Green Party, I think, just solely rests on Elizabeth May. I don't think anything comes to mind of what the Green Party. I know they changed their logo in this election cycle to the green circle. Uh, I'll leave that up to the viewers on their opinions on just having a plain green circle. But, did that really change anything? They managed to like get one seat in Parliament, but
Elizabeth Mays.
yeah, Elizabeth May's writing. I believe as of this recording, the co-leader stepped down as well. So it's just Elizabeth May and her party, which, I think that'll be the summary. If I had to quickly describe the Green Party, it's just Elizabeth May's party. And, we'll just leave it there for now.
What about the
Um,
Bloc
the
Québécois?
Bloc, they're in an interesting position for sure. They've definitely lost seats in Quebec, to the Liberals too. Um, just to target nationalism, Canadian nationalism and identity in this space. I believe towards the end of the election, there was some, not necessarily a scandal, but calling Canada a fake country towards the end was sort of their last jab in and getting their 2 cents in. It was quite interesting, but I do appreciate during the English debate, Yves-François Blanchet, he opens the floor saying, "You got me to speak English in Montreal," which is quite funny. But, other than that, he wasn't going to convince an Anglophone voter in Quebec to necessarily vote Bloc Québécois. So, you know, they do will, I mean, sorry, I'll just I'll repeat the statement, but in the greater picture, I think they'll be that voice in the back of everyone's head to include Quebec in the conversation during policy creation. So they'll definitely leverage that much is what I'll round off my last bit of what I have to say on this.
So in terms of the Bloc Québécois leaders' messaging strategy and performance throughout the overall campaign, I would say for a party that was not doing very well in the polls at the start of the campaign, he did admirably well, Yves-François Blanchet, as the leader of the party, by rejuvenating. First, he recognized that Mark Carney was going to win, so he couldn't. He always said that, but he made the argument that we need an opposition in the province of Quebec that stands up for Quebecers, and that Mark Carney is not going to be having absolute power. Right? He sort of alluded to those things. Um, but one thing that was also noticeable about Yves-François Blanchet during the English debate was where he really shined. And I personally think he was the real winner of that debate because he was the only one actually going on the offense against the front runner of the race, which was who was Mark Carney, um, and acting very much like an opposition leader. And they only ended up, well, losing 11 seats, and they currently have 23, which is still pretty good, right? And it doesn't seem like they've lost voters throughout this election. Um, like in terms of if you look at the popular vote, they're still
There were
around
some writings that were
7%.
very close in Quebec.
Yeah. Uh, but there were a lot of close races. I agree with that. Terrebonne, which was recently recounted again, on election night, it went to the Bloc, and then later on, it went to the Liberals by I think 48 votes or something, and then we got the announcement 2 days ago that it went back to the Bloc. So Tatiana Auguste was the Liberal candidate there. She was getting all giddy and happy, obviously, and then we get this news. So, recounts do have quite an impact. So it's important to be cautiously optimistic, which is what the Liberals were at the end of the campaign. And, a lot of pollsters were showing that we were going towards a Liberal majority. And then we see what happened during election night in terms of voter turnout and results versus the mindset of people. Um, were you surprised by the voter turnout and the results, in particular with the provinces of Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia?
Was I surprised?
Hmm.
Only in terms of numbers, not quite where I wanted it to be, but I am happy to see more people in the large picture went out to go and vote. That's what I'm glad about. Obviously, 68% is, it's fine, but could be better, right? That's where I'll leave that
Higher
there.
than 61
Uh,
or
that's true,
63,
for
right?
sure. Um, it is really in the face of American aggression that sort of got those extra numbers to go and
Yeah.
vote. I know both the liberals and the conservatives at the end of the day were chanting, "Oh, we got record number of votes." It was also the first election, year where
Trump was the boogeyman
absolutely,
throughout this
but
election, and he actually managed, and in other democracies too, that had elections at the same time, primarily Australia that I'm aware of. They just had their election too. Similar result. Their Liberal Party is called the Labour Party. Very similar result. The conservative leader over there also lost his own seat. So on that, we'll come back. But in terms of the what ended up happening in those three swing provinces is the segmentation of a binary choice. So we noticed that in the province of Quebec, it was between Liberal and Bloc Québécois. In Ontario and British Columbia, it was between Conservative and Liberal parties. And that was basically uh, the two other provinces that the Conservatives made huge gains in compared to the Liberals making those gains, right? In British Columbia and in Ontario. Ontario was where Liberals lost a lot of seats, actually, really close ones. But with the exception of Carleton, which was Pierre Poilievre's Conservative leader's seat.
Yeah,
Um,
Fanjoy won
were
that,
you
which was
surprised by
impressive.
that?
Yes, on election night, I was very surprised to see
Yeah,
Pierre
me
lose
too.
his seat of 20 years. I was talking and texting my friends that night. I'm like, no, I don't think it's going to be possible. It's a safe riding for Pierre. I thought, well, that was my preconceived notions, but I was impressed from that. Just quickly talking about out west in British Columbia, like Burnaby, Center and South, I thought those were strong NDP strongholds, right?
Used to
And
be,
for
yeah.
them to flip was also quite interesting. And the bigger picture, I think a lot of people sort of internalized strategic voting. I can't necessarily point to you to any exit poll statistics or nothing like that, but I think a lot of Canadian individuals sort of internalized the strategic vote to say, okay, maybe I'm an NDP voter or perhaps a Green or wherever they may be on the spectrum, and it's like, okay, do I bite the bullet and vote for a party that might not stand the greatest chances of winning, or do I vote for the liberals who or conservatives or whatever? Just use this as a variable of where to vote.
I do
So
think
I
that's what
think
happened, though. Even Green voters had to make a choice, right, to vote strategically to stop the threat of Pierre Poilievre in their mindsets. Um, I think the Liberals, last year, artfully and successfully, did do a good job in, painting Pierre Poilievre to be very much MAGA-like, right? And I do think it carried throughout this election. Um, with regards to the debates, I think one of the things that no clear winners really came out of those debates, and it didn't really move the needle one bit, in my view, other than the Bloc Québécois. Uh, because otherwise, if that was the factor that should have propelled and created a momentum, it should have been the NDP because of how many times he was trying to interrupt and all that stuff, right? Making arguments about healthcare, having his microphone cut, because he kept on talking about it.
even
Um,
some gesticulation from Carney telling him to calm down, I thought was quite
well,
interesting
yeah,
as
I mean,
well.
it was obvious Carney did not have debating experience because he never looked at the camera, and for me, it wasn't really much of a debate for Mark Carney. It was more like a lecture he was giving or a one-on-one interview that he thought that was a format to answer questions like he normally does, rather than debate. In the English debate, obviously he was much more comfortable, and it was when we saw him make like two or three attacks, but they were sort of like gentle attacks, about Pierre Poilievre's reluctance to get the national security clearance. Um, so, in conclusion, what are takeaways mainly with regards to this election result, and what do you think the parties should actually focus on now that the NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has resigned from the NDP leadership?
Well, I'll just briefly summarize. I think for the liberals, they're going to try and not be so out there in the extremes in sense of getting maybe controversial policies passed through the House. I think they're going to be much more reserved in some sense. I know there was a lot of comments about red Toryism or something, but I think it's just going to be back towards the center in terms of appeasing the most people possible because they are on thin ice, all things considered, right? We're in a unique period of time where the liberals have held a minority government for up to like a decade now, which is quite interesting, right? So how long can they maintain it? Can they reach 2029? Who knows now? Too early to say. For the NDP, it's going to be a lot of rebuilding because they got obliterated. So that will be interesting when it comes up to a new leadership race amongst the
Yeah.
party. For the Conservatives, too much right now for me to give you anything concrete. I think it's quite interesting that their leader has lost a seat, but when we looked at previously O'Toole and Scheer, they got turfed pretty badly when they couldn't get results and they couldn't win the election. So who knows? I think for now they're going to stick with Pierre, but there's a lot that could happen in the upcoming weeks. Um, so that'll be interesting for them. The Bloc, they're going to keep on, being the Bloc, try and get Quebec's interest heard and their voices heard for sure. What they can do is maybe sort of reapproach uh, rebuilding Quebec, but sort of remain critical of Carney's sort of. Sorry, I'll just round this off. They're going to definitely attack him on the monarchy position because I know that's up in the air in Quebec, and a lot of Quebecers disagree with monarchy. So I think there's enough room for them to keep poking little holes on that. So we'll see for sure. But uh,
So
yeah,
my few takeaways are for the parties, never take anything for granted. Even though the Bloc offered a liberal leader, the prime minister, 1 year of truce, it does not mean it cannot be reneged. Same thing for conservatives. Just because the leader lost the seat and then he's going to run in a by-election to win another comfortable and safe seat for him in Alberta, does not mean that the conservatives still cannot carry things forward and call a motion of non-confidence. That's been episode 1 for Real Talk. I'm Eddie Kerr.
John, thank you for watching.
Have a good one.